Welcome to our first bonus episode of Lights, Camera, Accolade. It's October, so obviously that means we're going to be talking about some early horror films in celebration of spooky season. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Jake.
Chrysantha here.
And today we have a special guest as well joining us, our good friend Abby.
Hi.
That's it.
Yep, that's it. That's my entire contribution to the podcast episode, actually. So I'm just going to leave now. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Wonderful contribution. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Great guest. A great guest. Also, I guess technically this episode could just be called like Lights, Camera, since horror is just historically snubbed. So no awards, no accolade, just, lights, camera, and I guess some people will watch this like some people hopefully listen to this bonus episode.
We're trying to elevate horror here, okay? Horror deserves respect, and we're going to tell you why.
It deserves a spotlight, I think, because to me, at the end of the day, it seems like the Oscars really prioritize like safe narratives, a lot of drama, a lot of things that people can relate to, and horror is this really different creative space. It's not really a safe genre. So that's just something that I find really interesting. It's like a reflection of people's different fears, anxieties going on at the time, which makes this period, because we're going to be watching movies that correspond with the movies that we're watching for our core episode. So in this case, we're watching movies from the 20s. And this is, again, as you know, if you listen to our first episode, after World War I, right? So what kind of anxieties and what types of fears, what sort of horror did people collectively go through? And then how does this manifest into something that's more of a catharsis, maybe like an emotional experience for people? I personally am not really the biggest horror buff. I get scared really easily, though I feel like they're a little early to be scary, so I feel pretty safe. Future Octobers, I might be suspiciously missing. It's like, oh no, I got sick that whole month. But these are still okay. I guess I'm curious. I know, Jake, you and Chrysantha both really like horror. So I'm curious, like, what draws you to horror and what are you excited to see in the origin of it?
Just as you were talking there, kind of about horror's place in the wider cinematic sphere, it got me to thinking how funny it is. It seems like that horror, for a lot of quote unquote movie buffs or people that are into movies, oftentimes when you talk with them, you'll find that horror becomes an entry point for them. And I think the thing about it is it's something that most of us as human beings can identify with. Like, with a lot of horror films, they trigger a lot of like base instincts and interests, but also they're just so fun to watch like communally. And for me, I know with my dad, we always used to watch a lot of horror together. Whereas a lot of people probably normally get scared like you, Sarah. Sometimes it makes me feel like warm and fuzzy in a weird way. Like
everyone's scared together.
Yeah, kind of exactly. It's like it's that sensation of like a theater going experience where you're all collectively having the same sensation at the same time. That's so kind of cathartic, as you mentioned. I think it's that much more pronounced sometimes in horror. What do you think, Chrysantha?
That's a big question. I had never really
I
given
know,
it
like,
much
why
thought.
do you?
Why horror?
Like, please
Explain.
examine all of it. This is like a psychologist chair.
Yeah, I think just like as a surface level answer, it's definitely like the story aspect of it. I don't know. I like the creepy element of it. And I feel like sometimes it can be mixed in with a lot of other genres. So most of the time with horror movies, it's like you get a bit of mystery, a bit of thrills, sometimes even like a romantic aspect, but like twist. There's even comedy sometimes inside, depending on like if it's a B-rated film.
I like those.
I definitely still do get scared of like scary movies. It just depends on which ones and the type and stuff. I think I'm just a thrill seeker. I've always been like that. So I'm probably the person in the movie who gets killed first because they hear a sound and they want to go investigate.
Always a great character. They're always identified very early on as being like morally flawed or annoying.
Right.
Can't believe you just called Chrysantha morally flawed and annoying.
I know. Yeah, exactly.
Well, she wouldn't be hanging out with me if she wasn't, so.
And I can definitely speak to that aspect of Chrysantha's personality because there's a horror video game called, what is it called? The one that we played, Phantasma.
Phasmophobia.
Yes.
I think I watched you guys play that one. Yeah.
Yes. And so that game, essentially, you're ghost hunting, right, as a group, and there's like hauntings that happen. And so you have to determine what is the cause of the haunting. And there are various devices to like go into this room, use these different tools and stuff. And I would always be like, I'll stay in the van and watch the cameras, you guys. And Chrysantha would be out there just like talking into the walkie-talkie, like, hello, is there a ghost here? Is anyone here? Going into the dark. And I was like, yep, there she goes.
Yeah, it varies because there are times like I've played Phasmophobia with my sisters and I'm like definitely the one like more spooked, and my older sister is the one who's more of like being the jokester. I do like to watch scary movies with her because she doesn't really take everything seriously, and she gets freaked out, but not much. Like she turns everything into a joke. So
I feel like she might be doing that so she doesn't get freaked out, because that's my way of coping. It's like, let's just joke about it all, you guys.
yeah.
That was my dad, and that's what I inherited.
I think a lot of it just has to do with curiosity. I am a very curious person, so I always want to, see what's beneath the surface of something or figure out the mystery. And so when it comes to horror, like it definitely, I guess it's just that scratch that I have. And so, especially when the story is really well developed and well done and the visuals kind of accompany that, because that daredevil thrill seeker side of me definitely likes to feel kind of like that anticipation of like, oh my God, what's behind the corner? I don't know. If it happened to me in real life, it would be a completely different experience. I'm just speaking strictly from like movies, video games, like just media.
I feel like I have a similar sort of fascination or curiosity about the unknown, but no part of me wants to experience it. So I feel like I would be the one being like, Chrysantha, what do you see? Like, tell me what you're discovering, but I'm not going to go in there,
You made such a good point there, though, Chrysantha, when you said, it's going to make you feel something. Like, sometimes with movies nowadays, I feel like I've seen so much that I'm like, I don't know how it's going to land. But I know if I throw a horror movie on, it's probably going to make me feel something, or hopefully make me see something I haven't seen before, which is like kind of what I seek out in movies nowadays. But like, it might not be a great movie, but you're going to like, the tension's going to be there on some level.
No, it's just going to make you lose sleep. Like, even so, for people to look ahead at our main sort of series where we go through the actual nominees and winners, The Exorcist did get nominated.
Oh, yeah.
And even though that's, at this point at our pace, years away, I'm still like, how can I be sick for that viewing? Or
wait.
like, what if I watch the beginning before she gets possessed and then, just kind of, skip to the end, be like, oh, she just, she got sick, went to sleep and woke up. That was a good movie.
I have
Good movie,
such
guys.
a good story for that, because I've only ever seen that movie once. And I watched it with my younger sister, and like it was something we experienced together. And like when we get to that point, like I don't know, I have such a good like it's
even just you hinting that you have a story about it gave me goosebumps. This is how low my bar is for being scared. I'm like, oh no.
Well, like it definitely is spooky. Like when I think back about it, I'm like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't talk about it. I'm gonna bring up like something I don't want to bring up, but it's just an experience, I guess.
Well, and I'll say you don't have to be Catholic to really be afraid of it, but I will say if you are Catholic and you went to Catholic school like I did, it lands a little bit differently. Because I remember when I was a kid, I was like, holy shit, this is real.
Yeah.
This is actually a concern that is applicable to my daily life. Thank you.
Yes.
But like even with supernatural films like that, like usually those are the ones that creep me out the most.
Yeah.
I think it's because of that fear of the unknown. But like when people talk about like, oh, I come from a really strong religious background, I'm like, I can't even say that because I don't. But they just creep me out.
It's just
anyway.
like you said, the fear of the unknown. Like it's just tapping into that part of the like the unknown and loss of control sort of aspects. But I definitely, the murder, thriller sorts of psychological things that are much more grounded in reality, I can watch no problem and sleep at night just fine, oddly enough. But if I hear like a sound in the kitchen or something, I'm like, ghost. That's a ghost. You know, like, absolutely. We are haunted.
I do have boundaries when it comes to horror because, like, I feel like especially as I'm getting older, I'm getting more of a, like, less of a tolerance. Like, when I was younger, I was able to watch like, slasher films, which usually are typically like have a lot of gore, sometimes a lot of sex. And now, like, I don't know, like, I can't, like, especially when the, like, I guess that torture porn horror genre came around with Hostel.
Yeah, and not my favorite. Yeah,
I don't like that. I did not like that at all.
Can't even watch those Terrifier movies. I tried. I could not keep up with it. And the thing that
I didn't even know those were a thing, and I saw the third one just came out. I was like, what is this?
Well, what bothers me now is because when you're a teenager, you're like, oh, these people getting killed are older than me. They're like drinking and partying, like, you know, they're living on the wild side. But then now that I'm old, I'm like, these are just babies getting killed brutally. Yeah. This is not right. They haven't even had a chance to screw up in life.
Protect the children.
Yeah. Meanwhile, it's like that House of Wax movie with Paris Hilton or something. But I'm like, still, don't kill them.
A classic.
They deserve more time.
Yeah. Abby, I'm curious where you are on like horror as a genre and like how scared are you of things? You know, scale of 1 to 10. Where are you at?
I'm a sicko and will watch any horror movie anywhere.
Hell yeah.
And I think the last one that I saw that actually was like, okay, I had a terrible time. Like, love that, had a terrible time, excited to never watch it again. Was Hereditary, but I think it was the sound design. Like, the sound design is spectacular in that movie. And now, like, many years later, I'm like, no, I would actually really like to rewatch Hereditary.
What? I can't rewatch it. I did finally watch that one, but what kind of helped me was taking a break because I watched it, you know, the group of friends, and we took a break at a certain point in the movie just as things were getting like really escalating and moving into the supernatural, and that broke some of the tension so that I could finish the second half without absolutely being terrified. Fantastic movie. Would never watch again.
So crazy. So many people kind of have that experience with it. It was a really good movie. I would only say that one scene kind of affected me the most, but the rest was,
I know which one.
Yeah, it was pretty smooth sailing in terms of like just analyzing smooth everything.
Sailing. I am out of my element here. I know. I'm like, what do you mean? You're like, yeah, just a normal Tuesday, honestly.
But I don't know. I'll watch pretty much anything. Very recently rewatched all the Saw movies.
Wild.
I don't know. I think for me, horror is really interesting because it is such a bastion of creativity. Lots of them are made for like $5 or with a group of friends, and they can still find an audience. So you get to kind of see independent movie makers in a way that you really don't get to see in a lot of other genres.
Yeah.
That's simply the culture of horror movies of, no, we're going to make something for $5 and we're actually going to show it to people. And there is a festival circuit for it. So, like, there's a big,
great point.
There is a big support, like, communally for like cheap or new horror directors to like actually show their stuff to people and to find an audience for it. And I think that is very exciting. So you get to see so much creativity and so much weird stuff that doesn't really get to the screen in a lot of other genres, especially now, right? Where so much of what's going to movie theaters is stuff that has had tons and tons of marketing money behind it, tons of studio money behind it. So you're seeing a lot of the stuff that is more mainstream. The mid-budget movie is dead, right? I mean, I know they're coming back a little bit now, kind of post-COVID, but for a really long time, it has been just multi-million or multi-billion dollar
like
movies.
Giant projects,
So I like horror in that respect because it's just, you see so much creativity and kind of, I like to see how people are solving puzzles with a lack of resources. So kind of how they shoot around their lack of money, or kind of how they make their money work for them is really interesting.
You're right.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great points. And I think as a genre, love it and I'm curious and I'm interested and like I'm all for it because I think like Chrysantha mentioned, you have a lot of genre blending, you have just a lot of what you're talking about, creativity, both in the limitation of your resources, but also with like how do we scare people, like what story are we effectively telling, how do we get people on this emotional journey. Love all of that, but in the same way that I would be in the van on the walkie-talkie being like, what do you see? Like that's still me with this is like, oh cool, what did you watch at the horror festival? But like I can't experiencing it.
You go,
like,
independent filmmakers.
You go. Yes, I support you, but unfortunately not monetarily because I'm not going to see your movie because I'm scared. Sorry.
I love that you mentioned that, Abby, because I know once we get there, it's going to be way down the line. But once we get to like the 60s or I think more so the 70s,
once you guys get there.
Yeah, with the history and all that, like that's pretty much how a lot of horror kind of started, at least from the films that we know with like Freddy Krueger or Jason and stuff. It kind of started with home kind of films that people were just kind of experimenting with. But I won't go too much into that because I don't want to, jump the gun.
That's a sneak preview. 5 years from now, everyone can join us.
Loyal listeners will remember this Easter egg.
Exactly. But yeah, I think lots of good reasons to be interested in horror and also be, I think, excited to watch the way that it develops, especially because it's like this space outside of what gets acknowledged. I guess on that note, we can maybe jump into the 3 movies that we watched if we want to do that.
Sounds good to me.
Abby, you get to choose the order because you get to summarize the movies that we watch for people.
My pleasure. I'm going to choose just the watching order that we went in. So that means our first movie is Haxan. Haxan is a film essay. So this movie is a blend of like documentary style, proto PowerPoint. And when I say this, I mean like lavishly produced dioramas and animated sequences. And then it also has a bunch of dramatized shorts. And these are all allegedly kind of chronicling the history of witchcraft and treatment of witches from the Middle Ages onward. The most expensive Scandinavian silent film made at the time, Haxan is obsessed with portraying period accurate scenes, superstitions, torture devices, in an effort to convince everyone that this is an academic dissertation concerned with the ongoing stigmatization of mental illness and the oppression of women, and definitely not a sex thing.
Not weird at all.
I'm glad you said it.
Yeah, I think that, just to speak like right off the bat in terms of genre blending, it was really cool to see this sort of early like documentary style thing, but then they had reenactments, right? Which we see all the time nowadays in a lot of like true crime or whatever else. We're like, this is a dramatized event, So just kind of seeing like, here's all of the history, here's the thoughts around medieval persecution of quote unquote witchcraft and going into detail there. And then actually filming it, right, as though you were there at the time so you can watch these scenes. And I think that helps to really give that sort of like horrifying depiction about how honestly some of the most like evil things are done by people to people, right, in like this weird organized thoughtful sort of way. And I think that probably just made seeing kind of hints of the persecution of witches as this sort of like misogynistic sort of thing rather than being like they were definitely real witches and this was a thing. I think it was meant to evoke more of that almost like sympathy in the audience for what a lot of women had to go through.
Well, you can tell that the director, his take on it was he was looking at it from aside from the fetishistic aspect, which Abby alluded to, and we can probably talk about more. I think he was trying to take like a progressive stance in the sense that
that's what it seemed like.
Oh, thank goodness! Now we understand that when women act out or are doing something we don't want them to do, it's because they're mentally ill.
Yeah, it's just hysteria, not demons.
So we're still not to the level that we think about everyone as a human being today, or we should.
Right.
But from his perspective, we're at least beyond the medieval witchcraft and fire and brimstone stuff.
Although I would say that there's something complicated there because, not to spoil the movie, but we're going to be talking about it in detail.
We spoil all movies here.
Yeah.
Look, if you want to watch it before the episode.
There is some parallel being drawn between the Inquisition and modern day physicians, like mental health physicians in like clinics. And like the very last shot of the movie is a cross dissolve between a woman in a like sanatorium shower and a witch being burned at the stake. Like there's a very real parallel being drawn between those two ideas of like, yeah, we might understand witchcraft as hysteria now, but the way that we're treating this is still not necessarily particularly empathetic to the person who is like suffering that.
So it's a continuum, arc of history bending towards justice.
Yeah, it feels more like that way to me, but
yeah, I'm kind of curious like how that was taken by audiences at the time and how it was intended even, because I can definitely see what you're saying, but I could also see kind of what Jake was saying, right? Where it's like, look at this is reality now as we understand it and is like good and proper, so to speak. But you can see the hints of like what she would have had to have gone through if she had had the unfortunate luck, right, of being born 500 years earlier. So yeah, I am curious with that. I kind of I like the idea that it's more progressive and kind of a recognition that we don't know everything. Right. And maybe we are similarly putting these women unnecessarily through plenty of pain until we know better. But I don't know which way it was, I guess, intended.
Sure.
So can we talk about the 240-pound pink guy in the corner of the room now? Because I think that might be, from Haxan, my favorite portrayal of the devil. And it's in no way frightening, but it's very memorable. Just picture like a 6'1", dad-botted up Scandinavian man, totally nude, who looks like he's just constantly downing serrano peppers and like sticking his tongue out like at everyone who sees him. And I was thinking as we were watching it, whenever I think about the devil, or I did when I was Christian, I would think like, okay, he's probably planning the next war or coming up with some kind of plague to unleash on the earth. But no, in this movie, the devil's main concern is like playing pranks on nuns and like watching old ladies sleep while churning butter, which I'd always heard that as like a euphemism for something, let's just say. But I had never known it was like, oh, okay, this is actually what they meant by that, because they use that a lot in this. And yeah, he just likes to like hypnotize young nuns into following him down corridors and like leaving banana peels behind him and stuff. It's very silly portrayal of the devil, but like I said, I think my favorite so far.
It was definitely an interesting movie. It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I didn't expect it to be kind of like a video essay, I guess.
Yeah, me neither.
Definitely different from the other two movies that we watched. Even though a lot of it was kind of like blending, I guess, fact and fiction, with the whole like witchcraft stuff. I really did enjoy kind of like the first couple of acts where it's going into kind of the witchcraft lore, where it talks about like, oh, they do this and this, kind of like just doing like a more educational sense of educational spiel to the audience, so they understand the next following acts when it kind of really delves into the persecution of women as witches and stuff like that. I thought a lot of the imagery was very interesting in that part, because I wouldn't say I dabbled in the occult, because when you say that, people think like, oh my God, you fucking worship Satan. But when I was younger, I was really into...
Chrysantha's a witch.
I was really into like astrology and stuff like that. And when you're learning about it, besides just, the astronomical stuff, like it's also more on the spiritual side. You see a lot of iconography of certain like images and stuff. And it kind of, I've always wondered, what is the meaning behind some of this? And a lot of it, you see with astrology is what they pointed out to in Haxan, where you have the sun and the planets and the outer rings kind of like radiating it from there. And obviously that comes from the belief at the time that we thought, kind of mapping out our solar system and stuff. But hearing how it related to, I guess in this case, witchcraft, was just interesting, because the movie also touched on how people, or just the population at the time when witchcraft was very much believed to be a thing, how they viewed the world. And I remember, I forgot what civilization or what it was, but it was talking about the different ways that different civilizations viewed the world. Like one of them believed that the world was surrounded by big giant mountains that we couldn't climb up above.
Right.
And
Yeah, that was cool.
even though I was, studying astrology and got really into it, I didn't spend too much time going into what each of the images meant. Like obviously aside from the constellations and stuff. And so like I found that part very, very interesting, but I thought that was very cool.
Same. I think that honestly, in a lot of ways, was my favorite part of the movie is this guy's video essay on all of those sorts of beliefs and stuff, right? Where it's like, they thought Earth was at the center. Now we know better. Also, miasmas cause, disease.
Or how about when it would be like a picture of hell and it would be like a demon stamping on somebody with their head in the fire and he'd put his little pointer up to the guy and he'd be like, this is a man with his head
explaining
in the fire.
everything. Like he's just trying to fill time for this presentation or something where he's like, I will say a thing and then point it out where it is on the
Thank
thing.
you, doctor. Now I understand.
Yeah. It was cool.
That was another thing that I found interesting too, was like the imageries of hell. And like, I don't know. I don't want people to think that like, oh my God, she's like, no, it's just like when after watching the movie, I kind of got curious and even when I was younger, I would kind of question, like, where does this imagery of hell come from? Where do these, where does it all come from? Because I feel like I know a lot of it came from, I think it was like Dante's Inferno with this whole idea of like, I think
the rings of hell.
Yeah, Christianity kind of took that idea of like this different levels of hell, and like each level represents a different way, how your soul will get tortured depending on the sins you've done.
Yeah, they're like, here's purgatory, here's paradise, and then here are the different levels of like how bad you were, you go to this level, or like what type of sin, you go to this level.
Yeah.
So it created like this structure. Yeah. I think it was in the 1300s.
I love a grading rubric.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, yeah, I just found that interesting, kind of like having those, I guess those similarities and then having those thoughts. I also kind of, once it really started kind of focusing more in on like, witchcraft and devil worship and all that, there's a part of my mind that kind of thought about like these people that were on this persecution of witches and that were so obsessed with it. I feel like a lot of the information to me as a watcher was like, I feel like a lot of it was just as like a scare tactic for people that didn't really understand.
Yeah.
So like this whole thing about the witches kissing the devil's ass, I was like, what the fuck? Like what? Like it just doesn't make sense to me to have like a group of people want to worship this deity or whatever just to go and kiss his ass. Like it just, I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it's like one kind of like, because it's supposed to be a mocking sort of thing, right? Like a mocking of like religion and stuff. But the thing that kind of made me laugh was that they filmed ultimately like a scene of one of their like, they're dancing with the devil in the woods sort of thing. And then they all take turns to kiss the devil's ass. And to me, I'm just thinking about the actors. Because I'm like, this is literally the man was here just like, leaning over. And then all of these women had to like literally do this. I was like, what
Abby
an awkward
said,
shooting
I think it was just, he was there like, we're doing this for science, ladies. Don't complain.
And they're like, can we see the source where women witches were allegedly kissing the devil's ass? We want to make sure that was an actual belief. And they're like, no, it's there. It's there. You just don't worry about it. We don't have time. So on that note, this movie was banned in several countries just because of how graphic a lot of the stuff was. By our terms, I feel like things like Saw or all sorts of things, right, become a little bit more graphic. But there was some nudity, definitely like some sexual themes in there. And then a lot of like depictions of torture and kind of the different torture devices. And again, that was another area where it's like, there's a lot of research that went into these medieval torture devices and stuff and how they work and how they were used. And again, I think there to evoke that sense of just like disgust in the audience, right? That people could be so cruel. And that's something that just sticks with me is like, who is designing these torture devices? They're like, the thing that, crushes your fingers one at a time isn't enough. We got to up our game and stretch someone out. Like who is doing this?
I have the perfect show for you to watch. It's
They have
it on Hulu. It's actually very interesting. I haven't finished watching everything, but it's part of the History Channel, and it's about essentially that. They talk about the history of certain torture devices, and they have a whole segment about like the
Dang,
electric chair,
of, like, how they came up.
the rack, different ways of.
Jeez.
It's very. I mean, it doesn't show anything. It just talks about like the creators, why it came to be. A lot of them stem from punishment, like a way of punishing criminals for whatever evil wrongdoing they do. And interesting show. Yeah, I think it's called Torture Devices Through History or
Amazing.
something like
Very
that.
straightforward title.
I can't remember.
I do think there's something interesting there, Sarah. We're talking about like just your reaction to the torture devices and talking about like how that they are presented on screen as something that is horrifying, maybe to an audience that was watching at the time and certainly got it banned from multiple countries. But there's kind of too like that fascination on the underside of it. I think even how it is presented in Haxan is at that point you're out of the dramatization sequence and back into a more academic quote unquote presentation where one of the actresses like trying out or showing these various torture devices. So it feels very like we're doing this in a modern period. And there's like that great card that's one of those interstitial cards that's saying, oh, the actress wanted to try the thumb screw. And it's kind of cheeky and funny. But also there's just that weird movement between how the audience is perceiving things and how it's being depicted, but kind of that weird fascination of, again, this is not a sex thing. Definitely academic, but it has that weird quality of don't you want to see this? Like it has the roots of every horror movie that you see where things cut away right before like the blood splatter. In how they're showing the torture devices. You see the person in the device and then it pans away to the person operating the machinery to do whatever it's going to do. You don't actually see what happens ever, but you can infer it. And there's this fantastic morbid curiosity in everything.
You can see that sort of morbid curiosity throughout history, right? Of like gladiatorial combat or all sorts of things, right? And so as we kind of progress and recognize that it's not as like, oh yeah, let's go watch, people. Well, I guess we have boxing and we still end like MMA.
We've got an election coming up in a few weeks that'll determine where we are on a lot of that too.
Yeah, I meant more as a sport, more as like this sort of thing. Is,
I don't know. One of the most popular videos from the latest Olympics was that guy who lost at the like pole vaulting because his junk was too big.
That's true.
That's true.
Yeah, we're all just base people. No one has changed. I would hope that society would progress, but really it's just shifted with new technology.
Well, I think that there's a really great essay about this movie called Haxan: The Real Unreal by Chris Fujiwara, which is on the like CriterionCollection.com. But he talks about how the movie is kind of it doesn't ever tell you when you're moving from superstition to more realistic portrayals of what is happening. It kind of really mixes in imagined and the mythic and real life. So really realistic lighting choices, etc. And then these crazy costumes. And how that is kind of being used to mirror what Chrysantha was talking about in terms of the different realms of the world and how people believe. So you're constantly moving back and forth between this real and superstition, but then also has this real kind of cheeky like wink to the audience, like you were talking about, Sarah, in terms of how the audience is perceiving it. The director is very aware of the fact that he is making this with a camera and showing it to people. And so it's that weird, fluid conversation between the text and the audience, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't even really think about that acknowledgement of like, because it's very much like a presentation sort of style, right? It's very aware of its audience the entire time. Did not even think about that. I will say the cinematography of this I had noted was surprisingly good. And I noticed that in actually a couple of the ones that we watched this time. In a way, again, I think this just speaks to horror as like a creative space. I think people are doing like a lot more interesting things with camera work and playing around versus some of the other early movies that we've seen from technically even later than these. But
funny you should mention that. So this movie, Haxan, was actually one of the most expensive silent movies ever made in Scandinavia. So it was around, I think they used around 2 million kroners to make it. And a lot of it was because it has like 6 different acts. Each act kind of uses different, I don't want to say technology, but like just technically challenging stuff. So they used like practical effects, makeup, set design. They used
had to summon demons.
Stop motion. One of the biggest sequences for that film was when it showed like the witches going, riding their brooms through the sky. They actually constructed a huge carousel that had like 250 like model houses. So that way when it would move or the people would crank it, it would look like the witches were flying through the air.
That's cool. I thought they were just really flying. So.
Yeah, it took like 20 minutes to crank it. So it was, pretty impressive.
Don't you miss practical effects,
Yeah, I assumed there was like just some like superimposed stuff, but that's really cool that they were just like, no, we're going to construct something so it looks like they're flying over the town. That's neat.
That's very cool.
And the devil that you love so much, Jake, is actually the director. He cast himself to play the devil.
No.
Again, not
This explains so much. This
totally
explains so
confirms Abby's theory. That explains this whole
He's like,
thing.
Nothing weird about this, ladies.
We're trying to elevate this movie to some kind of academic level. This guy is just laughing all the way to the bank.
I think those two things are happening, right? So you can have it be an academic dissertation about the fact that like we don't know everything, like Sarah was saying.
Right.
The things that were superstition before are now considered hysteria. Who knows what they're going to be considered tomorrow? And it can also be a weird sex thing where it's like, I'm going to kind of like show depictions of torturing women and naked breasts and women like doing profane acts against men.
Yep.
Also showing some weird BDSM stuff, right? Like it can totally be both of those things.
And churning, and literally churning butter.
Professor in the daytime, the devil at night.
Unsurprisingly, there were like rumors that popped up around this film about like what would happen after, the studio was closed and the lights were off on set. I guess because of the nature of the film and the fact that the guy was cast himself as a devil.
That is something that I kept, because obviously that's something that's really prevalent with horror movies, is there are always stories from set where it's like it was haunted or, there were weird things that started happening. So it's kind of like, is this part of, people psyching themselves out because they're in this environment where they're prone to that sort of thing? Is it part of like a marketing sort of sense where you're, again, that communal sort of like the fear that transcends even the movie? Like, ooh, this is blending into reality. Or is it real? That's about all I have to say about Haxan.
Yeah, me too.
Haxan, hacks off.
However it's pronounced. Do we want to move on to the next movie?
All right. So our next movie is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is, according to Roger Ebert, arguably the very first horror film. It's kind of presented as a story within a story where the main character, Francis, recounts the recent bloody events that have plagued the German town of Holstenwall, where a hypnotist has used a brainwashed sleepwalker to commit murders. Told almost entirely as a flashback, Caligari is maybe most notable for its fantastical set and design that outright reject realism.
So cool.
Talking about asymmetrical rooms, twisting village streets, and eye sockets dark enough to obsess the likes of Tim Burton today.
I got to tell you guys, I really liked this movie a lot. And I didn't really know what to expect going into it.
Me neither.
But very much the German expressionist setting with the houses that were like very dreamlike. You know how like when you're in a dream and everything's like not quite right, but like you can still make out, okay, that's a building, that's a person, but it's like a little off. Very much that vibe. And the really cool like 1993 soundtrack that we watched, because there's listeners who know about old film will know with a lot of silent movies, the original scores have been lost. So there's various kind of reimaginings, and we picked one from the early 90s that had this very kind of creepy score, but it really leads you along in that way that you appreciate with silent movies in an emotional way, kind of guides you into how to feel. But I just really love this one, and I won't spoil the ending of it, but it's got quite a twist. Well, I guess we have to.
I feel like
right?
we might as well. Yeah, we might, because it's such a cool
Go
part.
ahead.
But I totally agree on that German expressionism, the like visual distortion where the set has just a bunch of like really sharp, odd angles. You have really dramatic contrast between light and shadow. And yeah, just everything is kind of uneasy. Everything's tilted. Things don't line up properly. So it just gives that impression of like things are amiss, but in a very visually really, really cool way. I was really blown away by this movie.
It reminded me of like cell-shaded video games. I don't know.
Kind of.
Maybe that
Yeah.
was just
Or like
me.
film noir, you know? Yeah, kind of.
I think what helped a lot though was the score. I mean, I know in the beginning of the title screen it opens up with kind of like a music box, kind of creepy, almost like creepy, kind of carnival-ish too. I felt like that was the whole theme for the whole thing, like just dark whimsy.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
I definitely do think the score or the soundtrack that they had chose for it helped a lot with what I guess the director wanted the audience to feel. I really like this one a lot, mainly because of like pretty much everything you guys had mentioned, like the set design. It was just so different from others. And I went on a really big deep dive with, kind of researching, the history of horror and kind of going through each of the movies and stuff. And so this movie actually came out, I think, 2 years before Haxan did. So
yeah, this was 1920.
yeah, so before the 1920s, I would say like in the early 20th century, like 1901 to 1910, a lot of the quote unquote horror films that were being released were all mainly like based off of spiritual kind of like religious themes.
Right.
And this one kind of moves into a different realm where it's kind of skating realism, but at the same time, it's still using German expressionism as a way to convey a feeling for the audience, like a feeling of uncertainty with the set design, the makeup, the costuming and stuff like that. And I think a lot of it, also has to do with what was going on at the time, which was World War I. And it's just, I found interesting because I didn't know this until I started researching the film, was that this was specific for like, I guess, European audience, or what was happening like across the sea. It was so different from what was happening in America. In America,
right,
Hollywood was mainly relying on like Gothic literature and using that to create these films. They're using stories essentially to turn them into movies and profit off of that. And then in Europe, since they had experienced the World War, they were going through, a very kind of dark time, and then using art essentially to express their resentment against what, they had to go through. And I don't really know if there was a movie that I would say was strictly like the first horror movie, because I've read things like how Abby said, like some people say that this one is considered the first horror movie. And then there's another one that was released in 1896 by a French filmmaker called Georges Méliès. His movie, it was called The Manor of the Devil, and I've read that one is considered the first horror film. And it's interesting because since we were talking about like special effects and all this stuff that they did in Haxan, he was actually the one that kind of revolutionized all the, I guess, special effects, or just I guess technology that was used for films at the time, with, the stop motion, creating how ghosts, floating objects on film screen, because not only was he a filmmaker, but he was also a magician.
Oh,
so
fun.
he would cross over that into filmmaking to try to create something different. And I was like, that's very interesting. It's
in medieval times they would have tried him for witchcraft. He'd be gone.
It makes sense to have, that a magician would come up with this stuff, like creating illusion in the form of film. So I thought that was great. And then with Caligari, them using kind of like art and like expressionism to basically talk about something very dark and political that happened.
Right.
I mean,
like traumatizing.
the screenwriters, I think, were probably the screenwriters and the director. There's like, I guess, the story that how they all kind of came to be and how the movie came to be is pretty interesting as well.
Were they like, did they know each other during the war, or was it like a post-war sort of meeting?
Yeah, the screenwriters, well, they all pretty much met post-war, but the screenwriters bonded over their time, you know, in the serving, you know, and stuff like that, and then kind of like the resentment of what they went through. One of the screenwriters, I cannot pronounce his name for the life of me. It's the one that starts with the J. He was dishonorably discharged and actually ended up meeting the other screenwriters at a carnival. They ended up seeing kind of like something similar, like a whole sideshow attraction. And that's how the whole story for the plot of the movie came to be.
Yeah.
And for the director, he actually was, I forgot what town he was in, but it was something similar. There was like murders going on and they didn't know who was going what or whatever. So that's how his idea for the movie came to be. I don't know how they met, the director and the two screenwriters, but essentially they kind of like married the idea. And there was some discourse about the direction of the movie, about how they wanted it to go. The two screenwriters wanted it to be more realistic and focus more on realism and be more like a true crime kind of thing. And the director was the one that wanted to take it more on the psychoanalytic route.
Nice.
And that's kind of like how, I guess, the whole story came to be. I will say, though, that I wouldn't consider this to be, like, in my opinion, to be like the first horror movie. I would honestly consider it to be like more of the first psychological horror movie.
Yeah, like psychological thriller or something. I think you bring up a good point because the film differences, right, in America versus Europe at the time, and the differences in experience when you're living in a war-torn country, especially in Germany, right, where you lost the war and have gone through like all of this collective trauma, and you're rebuilding or struggling to rebuild after that, versus America, where you were in a very good spot after World War I. You know, obviously the people returning from war had a lot of trauma to work with. So you still did. Yeah. You had like absurdism. You had that sort of thing that comes up in like Charlie Chaplin movies or different films at the time. But for the general population and for people who did not see war, America was in an even better spot after World War I. So you were like just going headfirst into this really shiny era of like, man, everything is perfect, versus in Europe at the time, it was like, we are all traumatized, and you look around and you see just everywhere you look, right? It's like evidence of what war did and now how you can't get your previous life back. And I think the subject matter here, where the somnambulist, the sleepwalker. I'm going to say I'm not.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, because to me, it's like, okay, this is the general premise of that, right? Is that there's this sleepwalker who is being controlled to murder others. And I think there's a very real parallel between how soldiers felt in that they had no say over, you know, kind of the death and destruction, right, that they had to cause. They were just following orders sort of thing. And then, you know, there was that scene in the movie, right, where he doesn't kill the woman, you know, that he kind of like Bride of Frankenstein kidnaps out of her room. And it's just like that little bit of humanity that still struggles against something that, you know, is terrible. So I can see a lot of that, I think, that struggle for the filmmakers and the writers who had, like you were talking about, Chrysantha, that direct experience of trying to kind of process everything that had happened to them.
Yeah, not just in the hypnotist character either, like Dr. Caligari. It's also in a lot of the authority figures of the town, like all of the clerks in the office are sitting on that really high, at that high desk.
True, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very
that
striking
Wes Anderson
visual.
desk.
Yeah, that Wes Anderson desk, where they're really far removed from, I think it's Francis who goes there, but they're very much speaking down from the desk, which I think is that weird hierarchical structure of the whole town is very interesting. And yeah, I think ties into that too.
Yeah, for sure. and like orders coming from above, so to speak.
To be helpful to help like build the image for listeners who haven't seen the movie yet or aren't planning on watching it. The whole time through this movie, you're kind of following along this guy who is kind of piecing together what is happening with these murders and with this con man and his catatonic manservant.
Tim Burton would love him.
Babe era Conrad Veidt.
Yeah.
Like goth babe era.
Exactly, goth. He has that goth vibe. And ultimately, it's getting to the point where he's winding down the trail of the intrigue. He's finding out that the guy who's doing it is also seemingly the head of the local institution for the insane. And it appears as though this hypnotist has developed this fascination with this other man from like 100 years before who was doing this exact same con. They're piecing together newspaper clippings, and you've seen this trope in other horror movies later of the villain kind of trying to live out a fantasy of a previous demonic persona. But in any case, the twist at the end is just when you think he has the hypnotist dead to rights and the mystery is solved, it turns out that this guy that you've been following along with from the very beginning as the protagonist is actually in the insane asylum and one of the inmates, and he has been imagining this whole chain of events, these murders, his wife, who isn't even really his wife, who he's so protective of throughout the movie. It turns out that this is just part of his mania, and that the man who was conducting these murders through his catatonic manservant is actually, he got this part right, is head of the insane asylum. So he's pictured him in his mind as this kind of evil entity, when in reality he's just kind of lost touch. And I think this speaks so much more to, the fact that this is when Freud is really starting to take off around this time period. All of this stuff that Germany is going through, like you guys have mentioned, in the aftermath of the war. It's really, the filmmakers and the audiences in this setting were going through something, and it bears through in that. And the fact that it was the first film, at the very least, to do a twist like that. I mean, every horror movie that you've seen since that has that, wait, what? At the end, you can trace back to Cabinet of Caligari as the forerunner of that.
Yeah, I feel like just really good example of unreliable narrator. We see that a lot in fiction, but this is the first time that we're seeing it play out in film, which is really cool. Like, obviously, to modern audiences, we've seen M. Night Shyamalan movies. We know like twist endings exist and everything, but it was really cool to see it this early on. And I was actually reading, I'd have to do a little bit more research and fact checking on this, but I was reading that the original screenplay didn't have a twist ending. And it was actually the producer that was like, a little je ne sais quoi is missing here. And they added the twist. Yeah, like amazing call. That just elevated the movie completely. So again, I'd have to triple check and make sure that that is the case. But I did read it on the internet. Therefore, it is true and accurate.
And it also makes all the otherworldly environments and the German expressionist buildings and creepy music.
Yes.
It suddenly clicks into gear of like, because the whole movie you're watching, you're like, why does the town look like that? Is everybody like on mushrooms? But no, it's because it's this guy's fantasy of his reality.
His like
and
suddenly vision.
Everything makes so much more sense. In the last 5 minutes, you're just like, damn, how did I not? And I didn't see the twist coming. I was amazed because I'm such a cynic with movies. I feel like I've seen everything. It was like not.
I definitely didn't expect it because I just didn't think that was really like it wasn't. It obviously wasn't conventional to do that at the time.
I underestimated them. Yeah, same with you. I underestimated the filmmakers of that time period. I'm like, I'm just proud that they got the camera out and got it done. But really, they were like, they were cutting edge, man. Technically and storytelling wise.
Yeah, definitely.
I think too, like that kind of speaks to how maybe why this movie has been so influential. Like you can see it in the fabric of so many things that have more contemporary works. Modern directors are still obsessed with this movie. It's like there's tons of influence from this movie speaking like forward through film, which I think that is really interesting. I feel like I don't see too many movies like that where it feels like such a part of the DNA of film history where you can completely draw a connection line from this to, I mean, I mentioned Tim Burton, like clearly aesthetically there are similarities there, but I know like Del Toro has said this movie is one of his favorites. I mean,
And
the
Sarah,
twist
you're
ending
right.
thing
M.
with
Night
Scorsese.
Shyamalan. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, with Twisted.
there's so much of that. And I feel like even the lighting choices here really speak to the noir lighting that is going to come up in the 40s and 50s. It's just really interesting.
Do we want to move on to our final movie, Nosferatu?
Yeah.
The one most people have heard about from these three because it's such an iconic
Yeah.
character. But we'll get into the discussion, I guess, of what we think about it. Are you ready to kick us off with our summary?
Oh boy, am I ready. Nosferatu. It's an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, which changed all the names and locations in an attempt to dodge copyright law. So if you know the novel, you know most of the main beats of this movie. Legally distinct Jonathan Harker travels to Transylvania to sell legally distinct Dracula, a house in England, Germany. When Nosferatu arrives to set up in his new digs, he works his way through an all-you-can-eat buffet of village locals until the legally distinct Mina Harker contrives to destroy the vampire at great personal cost. Nosferatu is steeped in themes of the occult, anti-immigrant prejudice, and the kinds of societal paranoia that would ultimately go on to sustain the great blood-sucking vampire of the 20th century and beyond, Nazism.
Oh.
Okay, so just starting right off the bat with legal distinctions for this unauthorized Dracula adaptation. Apparently, Bram Stoker's widow did sue for copyright infringement, and she won. The court ordered all copies destroyed, but obviously some survived.
Much like the vampire.
Much like, yeah, exactly. And here we are with one of the most iconic, I feel like, horror figures of early film. But I will say it was not my favorite of the three. I'll just start there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings because while it definitely has those iconic shots of
Right.
Nosferatu, aka Count Orlok, aka Count Dracula, aka Don't Sue Us. A lot of the movie is just like very strangely in terms of continuity and narrative, just like them traveling. Like I felt like
It's kind of the
when
book,
Count
though.
Orlok is like traveling back to the village to bring the plague and start sucking everybody's blood, it just like drags and drags. And I was just like, this should be scarier. Like I said, there were a couple moments like when he rises out of the coffin and when you see his silhouetted shadow on the wall, it's like, oh, okay, this was, I can imagine back in the day being real freaked out by this. But I have to be
like I said,
honest,
this becomes people's sleep paralysis demon. They're like wake up in the
Absolutely.
middle of the night. They're like, is that him?
Well, I hate to be the guy that always says this, but listeners of a certain age, again, will remember the Nickelodeon show, Are You Afraid of the Dark? They had one of the episodes was like, I think the kid worked in a movie theater or something, and it was showing the original Nosferatu, and he came out of the screen into the room with the kid, and it was like such a distinct, like scary visual memory for me that like gearing up to watch this, I was kind of like a little bit nervous, like am I going to be like triggered like subconsciously? But then you see it, and it's just like, okay, it's a clammy guy with long nails.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Though, apparently, and this goes back to what we were talking about in terms of like stories coming from sets, right? Of like odd things happening. Apparently, Max, I think his last
Max
name is
Schreck.
pronounced like Shrek. Yeah.
Shrek,
So
like,
I'm like,
from the
there's
swamp.
different. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I think of a different Shrek when I hear that. But yeah, Max Schreck was so convincing as Count Orlok that there were rumors that spread throughout like the cast and crew that he was an actual vampire. And I'm like watching this, I'm like, from where? From where? But obviously different times, different, and we don't know how he was acting. Like maybe he was just fully committed to method acting on set, and so that wasn't really a thing at the time. So potentially wild stuff. Yeah, a lot of travel in this film, as you mentioned. And then I had to think, so in that travel, there are some cuts a lot of the time where it's like, look at the boat, look at the town, look at the boat, look at the town, the boat, you can now say like it's coming closer, you know, but it's really just shifting those same two shots over and over. But that is still an interesting concept that I don't think we've really seen that much of at this point, where you're letting the audience fill in the blank with like, why are you seeing the boat? Why are you seeing the town? You know, they're not directly telling you, but it's like, oh, because it's coming, you know, it's approaching.
Yeah.
So thought that was kind of like neat as a cinematic choice. But obviously, again, as a modern viewer, we're like, he's in the boat.
Yeah, there's definitely like editing choices are happening in a way that is not always a thing, particularly in American movies in this period, right? Where they're just kind of shooting basically a stage production in a lot of ways. Where they're shooting straight on, or, you know, you have these super long cuts versus here, there's definitely editing is occurring.
Right, exactly. Like some more creative liberties to be like, okay, how can we give this sensation without literally just showing you what your eyes would see, you know? As far as dissimilarities to Dracula, interesting choice here in terms of the character of Count Orlok, because Dracula was much more like convincingly human at times, right? So there was that menacing influence of like, oh, he just seems kind of like an eccentric rich guy, and there's uncertainty around whether or not he's a monster. Well, versus Count Orlok.
I would actually say that this is one of the few. So in the novel, Dracula comes off vaguely human, but he definitely has weird characteristics of like, you look at him and he's like a weird
Uncanny
creepo.
Valley. Yeah. But like, okay, but Count Orlok, you know, like no one is seeing this man like, yeah, he's just a little odd. There's something a little off. No.
I don't know. Jonathan, I mean, I can't even remember what his legally distinct name is. Hutter. He just is like, I mean, this seems normal.
Yeah, but he was a distinctly oblivious sort of like, it's probably nothing sort of person, you know. Anyone else who saw Orlok,
Hutter was just trying to impress his
Hutter
boss.
had other alternate, but meanwhile, the guy in the boat who like finally opens the coffin and sees Count Orlok there, he throws himself off the boat.
That's
you know,
fair.
like this is not a normal person.
You know what? You're right.
To be fair,
That's-
how many days have they been on that boat that far, and that guy hasn't crawled out yet?
That's
Might be
true.
surprised by a dead body.
That's true. Yeah,
Well,
maybe.
the
And then
thing
it
was,
rises.
Yeah.
We said it during that part, like his nails were 3 inches longer. So for whatever reason, that was the thing, that when the sailor saw that, he was like, oh, something weird is going on, and I would rather die than find out what it is.
It's interesting to think about how vampires have kind of changed over time. Obviously, now they're much more romanticized, right? You have like Anne Rice sort of influences over things where it's much more, romantic and almost like a fantasy, right? To be in that sort of space.
Sexy vampires.
And I think a lot of that comes from...
Oh, yeah, Twilight.
There's Carmilla, which is like one of the original vampire novels, but two, there's the... a lot of the Dracula movies since this...
Right.
That are a little bit more fast and loose with sexy Dracula. Seducing Mina or Lucy or whichever name they decide to use for the character in that particular adaptation. So there's a lot of like sexy Dracula in like the 60s and 70s.
Early film too. Yeah. Early film for sure.
Well,
and
he was
even
well dressed.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the thing. So I think even in the novel, you get a little bit of that where there's something off about him, kind of uncanny valley, but also there's something intriguing about him, right? That like draws you to him. And I think it's like that vampire magnetism sort of thing. But we do not get that with Count Orlok. We do not.
I feel like American audiences were just like, well, he's European, so that's just the way they are, you know?
Yeah, that's just how they are, you know? They're like, their front teeth. That's just, like, obviously I'm glad we moved away from we've moved the vampire fangs over to like generally natural canines, because the front two teeth were not doing it.
Yeah, he needed some orthodontal help.
It was not good. I am kind of interested if anyone has thoughts about Abby, like you mentioned in your summary. Obviously, there are kind of like anti-immigrant sort of sentiments with a lot of this because, it's like some shady stranger comes to town and suddenly
and brings the plague with him.
Brings the plague with them, yeah.
From everything I've read, there's no suggestion that the filmmaker was Nazi or anti-Semite. Like he hung out with
that was kind of what I was
Jewish
worried
poets
about.
and that sort of thing. But I think that there are so many things in here that are still speaking to the fears that were ultimately weaponized by the Nazi movement, where you've got a lot of like the whole blood libel thing and all this stuff that is like so virulently anti-Semitism.
Yes, yeah.
Or like even the stuff with Hutter's boss, who is so clearly like, now as watching it, it's like, wow, that's a huge anti-Semitic stereotype guy.
Right.
And he's kind of like, on the one hand, he comes to the point where he is in league with Nosferatu, who is also clearly like an anti-immigrant, anti-Semite stereotype. But two, like in the beginning where with the letter where it's all these symbols and it's kind of a reflection of Hebrew text. And also he's cheating Nosferatu out of because Nosferatu writes to get a home in the town. And he's like, well, let's give him this derelict mansion. So there's all this.
I thought that's what Nosferatu just specifically wanted, but okay, this makes more sense.
Dingiest mansion,
right?
Yeah, it could be either of those things, where it's like either he knows that that's what he wants, or he's kind of foisting it off on him. Certainly, Hutter doesn't seem to be in on the joke if that's the case.
Right,
where there's all these like ideas of like what is scary, and so many of them are what people use later to tie back to Jewish folks in Germany. Like it's just, I don't think there's any proof that Hitler ever watched this movie, but there are like, he in Mein Kampf like calls Jewish people like vampires on society and that sort of thing. So it was so, even if the filmmaker wasn't
like intentional,
spoke so clearly to an audience at the time that really took it and ran with it.
Yeah, that I could definitely see that. And I think a lot of times too, those sorts of like stereotypes that can be really harmful to a specific group of people, sometimes those just become part of this collective assumption of society, right? Because they're just there so constantly, and it's no one stops to reflect on like, no, this is extremely anti-Semitic or anti whatever group.
Right.
And it's kind of crazy that these things just proliferate and then get used over and over and over, because people start thinking about them as like, no, this is just a greedy character. And then it's like, okay, but how is the greedy character depicted all the time? And you have to kind of stop.
You have to stop and like
recognize
actually
that.
examine it.
Why do the goblins look like that in Harry Potter? Come on.
Yeah. Exactly. So that is interesting, right? Where it's like, yeah, it sounds like the director and potentially people involved in the film, it may not have been intentional, right? They might not have harbored those sorts of specific feelings, but it does speak to the environment that it was made in, and more to your point, the way that can still be weaponized either way.
That's super interesting though, because like I don't know, because I feel like you would have to go even deeper though. Like, where does the background or the origin of like the belief of vampire come from?
Like the original.
And then how would you relate that? I've never read Dracula, so I don't have like, I guess, a background to go off of other than things that I already know about, I don't know, basic vampire lore. But at least for when I was researching the movie, like I didn't come across anything like with, I guess like anti-Semitism and Nazism and stuff like that. But I do know, like, talking in terms of like that hieroglyphic stuff on the message, does Dracula have occult origins in the book? Or is that specific to the movie?
I'm honestly not sure. It's been a while since I've like read, and I've never finished Dracula. I'm so sorry. But I'm not sure. I don't know kind of where the origins are like attributed to.
Yeah, I think the book doesn't really go into it.
I think they started from this movie then, because that's what I had read was like the hieroglyphics in this movie, or quote unquote hieroglyphics, are actually it's a Enochian language, so it's considered like an angelic language that was found or recorded in private journals of an English occultist named John Dee and his colleague Edward Kelly.
Oh, I know John
in like
Dee.
the late 16th century Elizabethan.
He was at Elizabeth's court. Yeah.
The original James Bond.
He was like an interesting ne'er-do-well con man that Elizabeth liked to keep around to like tell whimsical stories, but he was also doing research and took seriously the idea that there were mystical properties to reality, and that if you look to actually old biblical texts, there are secret clues and a subtextual language that you can use to, do alchemy or discover longevity or whatever. And she gave him a fat paycheck and had him hang around her court. But that's interesting.
Okay.
I didn't know that was the origin of that written language there.
Yeah, I didn't know about that. I just read that and I was like, oh, okay. Because like in this movie, I guess in attempts to deviate from Bram Stoker's Dracula, they
No relation.
Oh, well, no
TM,
relation.
TM.
The director decided to give
Brian Stoker is listening like, God, I'm stewing right now.
well, the director decided to give Count Orlok a demonic kind of occult origin or demonic lineage. So that's why in the movie when I think what's his name, Hedder is reading the book, it's talking about Belial, and Belial is
Yeah,
one of Satan's archdemons, and so Orlok in the movie is supposed to be a creation of Belial, and in the Bible, I believe they refer to Belial as associated with like pestilence and disease,
like plague,
manifestation of contagion. So that's why in the movie, he's like when he opens his coffin, like there's rats, and then when he lands on the ground, he brings the plague or like just contagion with him, and so that's the whole tie with, I guess, the origin of Count Orlok and his association with Belial and stuff like that. And so
that is super cool. And you have to wonder what else the characters would have learned about Count Orlok if they had read more than the first 4 pages of this book.
Jonathan.
It was literally, it's like a book that's probably almost 4 inches thick. And the only characters that read it, it's 4 pages. Like we only read 4 pages of this book.
Yeah, it's one of those
Probably
things
not
where
important.
it's movie magic and they're doing it for dramatic effect, but it's like that feeling of, don't go up the stairs, what are you doing? But like, read the next page, you'll find out this guy that you're having a sleepover with is like draining your blood every night,
Who, him? He looks so normal though.
I think the connection with Belial, I guess, for Count Orlok is to basically like hint at the audience that like in a previous life before Orlok became a vampire, he practiced black magic prior to becoming a vampire.
So he's got deep lore that once again might have been in that book, but we don't know. It's only hinted at.
Yeah.
So maybe he was a man,
right?
A normal count. Like I just feel like of all the noble titles, Count is kind of the creepiest, and it's probably because of Dracula.
Evil vibes.
But
Count.
maybe he was like, trying to do some witchcraft, and you made a deal with the devil, and he's like, you can live forever, but you got to look creepy as hell, and
and your
do my
front
bidding.
teeth are gonna be sharp little knives.
No, his teeth were like
that
that
is super
already.
interesting. Oh, okay.
Another interesting tidbit too is like because they didn't know how to end the movie. And like I said, the whole copyright thing with Bram Stoker.
Can't do the same thing.
They decided this movie is the one that introduced the whole thing about vampires burning in the sun. So they thought like they didn't know how to end the movie.
Yeah, that's so iconic
so
now.
they decided to like, okay, they're not like the sun will burn them up. And
Wow.
I bet someone was in the room, a naysayer, being like, that's really stupid. That's never going to catch on. And now it's like the main vampire lore.
Yeah. Well, I guess before that, it was just the stake in the heart.
Yeah. Or maybe
No, that
beheading
makes
or
sense
something.
because in Bram, I did watch part of the movie of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and he's walking around outside in the sun. I was like,
Like,
the hell?
maybe some really strong sunscreen.
So-
But yeah, that makes sense.
yeah.
yeah, I thought that was very like, I don't know. I feel like at this point, vampires are so overplayed. I think mainly because of Twilight and stuff. But I thought that was very interesting because
Somehow sparkling has not caught on yet, though, with the sunlight. But
Can't believe that's not the thing that people have taken away.
Yeah, I'd always wondered like where those tropes came from, and like, yeah, it makes sense. Just watch a movie from the 1920s and
Yeah, and now you know.
Suddenly everything makes sense.
It all falls into place. So yeah, I'm really glad that we went back and watched these movies and are kind of coordinating and figuring out what else we can do to watch things outside of the award circuit. Because this was really illuminating and obviously a ton of fun to watch these. Do we want to give like a ranking of where we would place all three of these?
Sure.
I'll go last. Someone else can start.
I would say that while I enjoyed watching them all, especially watching them with you guys, I would say that Nosferatu is my bottom tier, just because other than a few kind of iconic visual moments, I did think it dragged a little bit, and it was kind of like derivative of every other vampire thing we've seen, although now we know maybe it originated
technically,
some of those things. So that's interesting. But just in terms of a viewing experience, that was my least favorite of the three. I really enjoyed Haxan. I got to tell you, like I said before, that portrayal of the devil is probably my favorite. The fact that I know that strange Danish man did it, and the whole movie was just like a cosplay opportunity for him to live out whatever fantasy he had, just enhances it so much. But also a lot to learn about, the progression of the treatment of women as it relates to witchcraft and mental health. Like, there was interesting things that they were saying there. So I did enjoy that movie. I thought it was very neat, and I could see why it was banned, with them stamping on the cross at various scenes and engaging in satanic orgies and whatnot. It was, if you guys are looking for a risque movie that we've watched, that's probably the risqueest one yet so far.
Yeah.
So that was my second. And then, like I said before, Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Calamari?
I've said it 3 different ways. I don't know. But that was my favorite by far. That, I have to tell you, other than Wings, if I were to tell someone to try a silent movie to think if you can handle it and enjoy it, this would be the top one that I would say. It would be kind of both of them neck and neck in terms of what you would have the most fun watching as a silent film. And that twist at the end, so great.
Yeah, super cool.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Jake. Definitely the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is probably number one. I really did enjoy that movie. The story, set, pretty much everything about it. The score too, even though that wasn't the original one, sadly. But,
right, yeah.
Did enjoy that a lot. Haxan, I think putting it second place is kind of high for me. But I guess like if we're putting him like in order, just ranking, yeah, that would probably be the second. It was just different. Definitely reminded me of early YouTube days when, I don't know, people were just making videos about everything, and you come across those research videos. Yeah, that's what it reminded me of. And then Nosferatu, I guess I think I kind of shot myself in the foot with that one, just because I went in with higher expectations.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say I disliked it, but I do agree with Jake. It did drag in parts. I appreciated seeing the original, like just seeing the movie in general as a horror fan. I will say I am curious about watching the version that was released in like the late 1990s, because they added the soundtrack of a goth metal band that I really love called Typo Negative.
Incredible.
So
cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, I'm curious to watch that just to see how the music translates. But yeah, it would probably be in the bottom tier. I enjoyed kind of like the camera work with shadows and some of the creepy things, but it's, compared to the other two, it's there, but it just didn't hit the same way as the Cabinet of Caligari.
I think for me, Nosferatu, historically significant, I'm sure fantastic for the period, but as a viewer now, I have Dracula adaptations that I prefer.
Yeah.
What? This isn't, though.
I know.
Abby, come on.
I'm sorry.
They're very
completely
litigious,
unrelated things.
The Stoker family.
Yeah. But no, I think Nosferatu is great if you're into film history and you kind of really want to understand some of the original DNA of particularly Dracula, which has had a million billion adaptations. It's fun to go back to the original and kind of see where everything came from. I think Cabinet of Caligari is number 2 for me. I think it's stunning in terms of visual design and aesthetics, and I think has a very cool narrative structure. I just think Haxan is so weird and particular and specific, and it really appeals to the person in me who loves to watch a 4-hour YouTube video essay. But I also think for me, it's just doing so many things on different levels in terms of like academia, but also like the weirdly horny stuff and also the examination of misogyny and that sort of thing. I just think it's the pieces of that are really working for me. But I think really technically that one and Caligari are neck and neck. It just edges itself out a little bit because it's so weird.
It is. It's such a weird movie.
It's a weird experience.
It is cool. Yeah. It's always nice to see someone who's passionate about a certain subject just go all in on it.
Yeah, it's like when you go over to someone's house and they have like a 2-hour PowerPoint that they show you about their passions. I do really appreciate that.
Yep, totally normal activities.
And they're fully nude, painted red, sticking their tongue out at you.
I think my ranking is going to fall in line probably with the majority here, where third was Nosferatu. Very cool, like y'all have said, to see the origins of stuff. Definitely felt long. All of these movies were about the same length, but I was like, man, this one feels like it's 3 hours. It just dragged at certain points. Second would be Haxan, with kind of a pretty large gap, I feel like, between those two. It was strange, weird. I feel like I learned a lot, and it was cool to see the juxtaposition of someone researching medieval beliefs and witchcraft versus us watching them 100 years later, kind of putting all of this together.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just like that sort of weaving through time was really neat. And then definitely Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, number 1. It was visually stunning, and it just flew by. And I think even without the twist ending, it would have been my favorite of the 3, but that just elevated it even further. It was just a fun movie, very visually cool, and definitely I think worth watching today. But if you're a horror buff, like all of these are pretty cool. But yeah, hopefully anyone is listening to this, whether it is when it released in October 2024 or years later when people actually know about us and it's not just like our parents maybe listening to these. But we appreciate all of our listeners. Our regularly scheduled programming will come out first Tuesday of every month. But as we've mentioned, we have a lot of exciting bonus content that we want to get to deep dive outside of that award circuit, and we'll be releasing fun, interesting, at least fun for us, bonus content each month as well. So stick around, like, comment, subscribe, and join us on this journey.